Changed today in Vernon Parish as Fort Polk became Fort Johnson during a redesignation ceremony just a little over an hour ago. The post is one of 9 Army installations being redesignated to remove its Confederate name. The name honors Sergeant William Henry Johnson, a World War I Medal of Honor recipient from North Carolina, who served in the New York National Guard's 369th U.S. Infantry Regiment. Johnson enlisted in the U.S. Army on June 5th of 1917 and was assigned to Company C, 15th New York Infantry Regiment, an all-black National Guard unit that would later become the 369th Infantry Regiment. That regiment was ordered into battle in 1918, and Johnson and his unit were brigaded with a French Army colonial unit in frontline combat.
He became the United States' first hero of the Great War, immediately receiving the French Croix de Guerre for his actions, the first American soldier ever to receive that award. The warrior spirit that burned within Sergeant William Henry Johnson now inspires generations of soldiers, soldiers that will now call JRTC and Fort Johnson home, and soldiers that will continue to come here from all over the nation and all over the world to train. May we all continue to forge the warrior spirit within ourselves, honoring the sacrifices of heroes like Henry Johnson.
Johnson was unable to work due to the severity of his combat injuries when he returned home from war. He died in July of 1929, buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Johnson was awarded the Purple Heart in 1996, the Distinguished Service Cross in 2002, and the Congressional Medal of Honor in 2015. We'll have more coverage of the redesignation ceremony on our evening shows.